Welcome back to the Fight Club. We're very excited to have this new series, the Bedtime Series, to just kind of continue to meet new people and talk about great fight stories, especially during this time. We think that now more than ever, we all need a little uplifting message and just kind of to come together as a community once more and just really talk about the things that some people don't want to talk about, but just to unite us all and make us feel stronger.
So with that being said, we're really excited to have a guest who actually doesn't go to Queens, because we have yet to have a guest from beyond the Kingston community. We're going to be talking to Chloe White today. Chloe has just been an amazing leader and activist when it comes to combating mental health and overcoming adversity, and I think she has some really amazing insights that she can share with all of us. I know that personally I found Chloe's story to be extremely inspiring and motivating, especially during times like these where it can be hard to get out of bed in the morning and it can be hard to want to do things, especially when we're so isolated and restrained right now. So I think Chloe will definitely be able to shed light onto some of those feelings that we're all sharing. And with that being said, I'd like to introduce Chloe, and I would love to start off by having her kind of explain to you guys why she's a member of the Fight Club and why she's here today. So take it away, Chloe.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me, first and foremost. I would say that I'm a member of the Fight Club just because of the adversity that I faced at a pretty young age when it comes to mental illness, and just really overcoming that adversity. And I mean, it's really a continual process. So I really do continue to overcome that in a lot of ways, and that takes a lot of work. But for example, when I was pretty young, I was diagnosed with depression and generalized anxiety disorder, as well as alcoholism and substance use disorder. And now I've been sober for, I'm coming up on 6 years. I'm just checking the date.
So I'm actually amazing.
Yeah, thank you. I'm 5 years and like 10 months now, which is amazing and really cool. And has just enabled me in a lot of ways to kind of, open my eyes to this whole world of really fighters, as you know, as you guys are using that word. And it's been just like a great journey, because it's also just helped me figure out really what I want to do with my life and what I'm passionate about. And so I hope that answers the question.
Awesome. Okay, so I think maybe we can start off by just talking about generally or specifically some of the things that you've been through, because obviously it took you a while to realize that this was something you wanted to overcome and something you wanted to fight back against, and you've clearly done an amazing job at that. So maybe just speaking to that a bit.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, I'll kind of just give a little bit of backstory to, where I was when I got diagnosed, and who I was and kind of what my life looked like. But essentially when I was pretty young, I mean, really from a really young age, I definitely always felt very apart from, and I always felt like there was something that was dividing me and my peers. And I didn't understand that. And obviously being a young girl, there's so many little pressures that I had to deal with as well, that I just wasn't, I continually just never felt equipped to deal with life. Everything that was happening for me was really just so overwhelming. And I didn't really understand why, for me, it appeared to be so overwhelming, and more overwhelming than it did for other people, and other people my age specifically. So that really led me down a path, when I was younger, I started to self-harm. And for me, what that looked like was cutting myself. And I was pretty young when I started. I think I was 10 or 11 years old. And it was really just a coping mechanism, I didn't feel like I had any resources to be able to deal with this. And what was really overwhelming about it was that, there's a stigma around mental illness and about emotional instability in general. And so that wasn't ever something that was really talked about. I never learned about it at school. I didn't learn about it at home really. And that wasn't to say that I grew up in a hostile environment. Like I grew up in an amazing environment, but these things weren't really talked about. And so I felt very different from. And so when I started to self-harm, it was really this kind of like inner retreat, to kind of deal with my pain in another way, because it didn't feel like I really had many resources outside of myself, or that even though I legitimately did. I could have talked to my parents about the way I was feeling. It was very taboo. And so, and that really goes back to the stigma piece. And so, I mean, I started to self-harm, and after, self-harming for about a year, I really started to I changed schools, and things kind of got worse still. And I attempted suicide for the first time when I was in grade 7. And it was also something that was still very taboo, like it was this, I found myself in this cycle where I was self-harming to feel better, but and like feel more, feel something other than the deep emotional pain that I was feeling. And I wanted to so desperately feel close to people, like we all want to feel connected. And I was really unable to foster those connections. And I just continually felt apart from. And so, and it became this cycle in that I self-harmed to make myself feel better, but then that was something that was more taboo that I didn't want to tell anybody about, and I was really ashamed about. And so I talked to people less, right? And so I was more disconnected, and so it really became this like very toxic cycle that really just fed into the depression. And so I switched schools again, and thinking that would help. And my parents at this point too, I mean, they had obviously noticed something was wrong, and were trying to get me help. And I spoke to some amazing professionals at the time, but it really was, I was really resistant to that help. I just didn't, there was something, it still was like, I was searching for a solution. And like, I had like tried all these solutions, and one of the solutions that my parents had provided for me, which was these professionals, I was like still really like hesitant to go to. And I didn't buy in. I didn't buy into that solution. And maybe part of that was that there wasn't really a lot of discussion about like mental health and like mental illness recovery. Like, I think that approaching mental illness now in this day and age, and even like for my kids, is going to look so different, which is amazing. And I mean, I switched schools again, talking to professionals, all this stuff is going on at once. And I really started to hang out with this like kind of older, cool crowd. And while I had been self-harming, I mean, I had also still been hanging out with people who, maybe weren't the best for me in retrospect, but, I was really desperate for that connection. And so I started to realize that, like drinking and using drugs really got me accepted by a lot of people, and also just made me not care. Like it was a feeling of calm and just peace that I had been searching for. And that probably, that started to happen before I actually even switched schools. So I was self-harming at the same time that I was using, or I began using, and my using escalated really quickly. I mean, I started drinking at 11, and by the time I was 14, I was in full-blown alcoholism and addiction. And a lot of that just, I can look to whatever source. I was hanging out with the wrong people. I was doing whatever it was like, I still, at the end of the day, like I went home and I couldn't stop. And it was, for me, all that I knew to do. Like I said, I had been searching for the solution, and then there it was. And I was like, oh my God, like this thing liberates me. As I started to use more and more, obviously my depression and my anxiety was very alleviated by using. And so that really fed into the cycle as well. And I was very resistant to giving it up. I mean, my parents were started to notice when I was maybe 13 this was becoming a problem, and were obviously very concerned and tried to, you know, have conversations with me and bring me to professionals again. And I was just not interested. And that was because this was this amazing solution to me, and I, at any cost, would not give that up. Like, it didn't matter if it was going to kill me, it didn't matter any of that, because it was like all of those things that I had felt from such a young age that I hadn't been able to label, that I didn't feel like was okay talking about, that I didn't know how to navigate. All of a sudden, this thing just gave me all those. Basically, to kind of like conclude, my parents, obviously knowing that everything was really reaching a peak, tried to get me some into treatment, so like inpatient treatment, which is a very like extreme measure that a lot of families have to go through, especially when it comes to addiction and alcoholism, and actually for a lot of other mental health, like mental illnesses as well. Eating disorders often, you know, require inpatient treatment a lot of the time. And so for me, I mean, it was life-threatening, you know. It was getting to that point where things were, I couldn't stop, and I didn't care what the repercussions were going to be. And so, yeah, my parents sent me away. It was not by choice, which is always a very funny thing to get into. But it's an interesting story. It was not my choice. I got sent away. I was transported, which is essentially when two strangers wake you up in the middle of the night.
Like the movies. Like
yeah, for sure. It's really otherworldly.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much like the movies. And yeah, so that's what happened. Two strangers came and took me. Obviously, I was scared. I was very confused. I mean, I knew this was like a problem, but I was like, I don't care, you know, like nothing was going to stop me. And so they took me to a wilderness program where I was for 3 months. And then I went to a boarding school for a while, just because it was like, that was kind of a better transition for me than just going straight home. Obviously, like a lot of, you know, those ingrained like family dynamics as well, and just social dynamics all existed in Toronto for me. And so to really like better improve myself, I had the ability to go to boarding school afterwards. So I did. This was all in the States. So I went to boarding school in West Virginia, and then I came home. And yeah, I mean, I can get into what life looks like today.
I'm interested when you got, because that's something that I can only name like on one hand the amount of people I know who have like successfully gone to, would you call it a rehab facility? The three.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So how was that transition? Because I can't imagine how scary it would have started out, but if you were leaving feeling ready to move on with your life, like how was the transition kind of timing wise, or how was that for you?
Yeah, it was a huge transition for sure. I mean, living in the wilderness is like wilderness therapy as is really a unique thing of its own beast. And essentially, I mean, I didn't have any kind of electronics. I didn't have a shower. I didn't have a mirror. Like I didn't, you know, like these things that really we interact with on the day-to-day that we don't think much of. Like I didn't have any of them. So it was a huge transition, even though I was going to boarding school, which was still like this kind of like very sheltered community. It was still a really big transition. And the thing I had been running from my entire life, which was like my emotional stability, really was obviously it was all gonna unravel. And I saw that, and I was really annoyed about that because I wasn't trying to deal with it. Because because I was really hopeless, you know, like I was really at this point where it's so interesting saying this nowadays because I really think I'm such an optimist.
Yeah.
But I just like was in this dark hole. Like the way I used to describe it, I remember like having one of my first therapy sessions in Wilderness and being like, I'm just in this like dark tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like there's just any light. Like it's just like, you know, like sometimes, yeah, we go through dark times, but it's like now when I go through dark times, it's like, okay, I'm in this dark tunnel, but like there's a light. Like it's like, it's fine. Just got to walk through it.
Right.
It just wasn't like that for me. Like I was like, I don't get why I'm here because there's no light. Like there's not a hope for me. There's not a future. Like this is what I've succumbed to and this is my life now. And I don't care if it kills me because there's nothing else that's going to be better.
Right.
And so it was a process to really start to even just like develop really any ounce of self-care and self-worth that made me start to believe that my recovery was, I mean, warranted and also worth it, and it was possible. And so that took definitely probably a month in Wilderness, and I was there for 3 months, and the program's really intensive. I mean, you're there doing therapy like all the time. You're in the middle of the woods and just hiking a lot, and your life is on your back. So you have this like big backpack, like we would hike like 20 miles like a week kind of thing. Like it was really intense and crazy. And just in all of that, you know, it's interesting. The physical component really brings out the emotional component.
Yeah.
It took me probably like a month to warm up to the idea. And then after that, it was kind of like, once I gave it a little bit, like a little bit, I was able to kind of like start to open up the package of like, okay, we can start to look at this. We can start to unpack this. And really working with, you know, I had an amazing therapist. I had amazing resources. Like the program is really phenomenal in my experience. Unfortunately, a lot of people go to wilderness programs and have really terrible experiences, which I can also see why. Yeah, it makes sense. But for me, it was really fabulous. And I mean, that transition out of there was crazy. And it was even crazier going from boarding school actually just back to home, because I mean, like really piecing my life back together after everything, you know, like I'd also hurt a lot of people and had really burned down a lot of bridges.
Right.
And, you know, like my friends, my brother didn't want to talk to me for a long time. There was just a lot of damage done, all because I couldn't take care of myself, and I didn't care to take care of myself, you know.
Good on your parents for recognizing that and being able to be like, hey, we need to do something about this. Because sure. I know that's definitely so hard for some people to recognize and for their families to recognize. And so now in your role as an activist, and I know you like help a lot of people who are in these situations, what would your advice be to people who are like how you once were, and how can they start moving towards the path of like becoming and evolving like you have?
I definitely, in my activism work, I've been asked this question a lot, and it's definitely something that's really hard to answer. Everybody's path to like recovery, whether that be from depression and eating disorder, alcoholism, drug addiction, looks really different. And what I've really learned from, you know, my activism as well is that people have such versatile stories and such versatile experiences. And so it's so hard, you know, like to know what the thing would be like and sometimes I think about it in this way of like, what would I have wanted to hear? And I probably just would have wanted to hear, you know, like someone does love you, you know, like someone does care for you, and that care can carry you through to a place wherein you will be able to like love yourself again. Because for me, it was that I never, you know, like that love from other people, like nothing ever felt like enough. You know, like the self-harming wasn't enough. The drugs and alcohol weren't enough. Like nothing was enough to really carry me through that pain.
Yeah.
And just, you know, like knowing now today that like other people's love, like my parents' love, my friends' love, like all these different amazing, beautiful sources of love did carry me through to that place where like I can truly say nowadays, like I do love myself, you know, and like that's enabled me to be able to give back and really center my life around being of service and like being an activist for people facing all different kinds of struggles.
For sure. And if the answer were that easy, right? Like this wouldn't be an issue.
Totally.
People would be able to get through it. So everyone just needs to figure out their own path and what works for them.
Totally.
I think also now maybe I'd love for you to like speak to some of your activist work and maybe talk about like what you're doing now to stay involved and I don't know, like different outlets you have.
So right now my the majority of my activism work has kind of been more on the research side of things, which kind of seems really disconnected and sometimes is, but I've become really interested in just like psychological research. I go to McGill and I work in a lab there, and I've had a really amazing opportunity to get my hands wet and just like, you know, doing my own research and doing my own little project with one of the grad students in the lab. And the lab focuses on studying eating disorders, which is amazing and is an issue that a lot of people are not talking about. I've seen that you guys have had someone on who is recovering from an eating disorder, which is phenomenal. It's actually a lot of people don't know this, but eating disorders are actually the most deadly mental illness. And it's also, ironically, on the flip side, the least treated mental illness. Like, it's
insane. Very
under-researched. There's very few treatment facilities, and it's killing the most people. So, you know, I that's actually been something that I've really become super passionate about. One of the reasons why I'm involved in that research side is because people need to have a better understanding of this and better understanding of eating disorders and the severity, and they exist, like their reality. And for me, you know, that research, providing that research actually does really influence that and is able to actually impact the larger discussions, and in very small ways, of course, but you know, all these little things piece together to form a bigger picture. And with that bigger picture, you can do a lot of amazing, important work that will frame policy, that will frame access to resources, that will frame treatment methods, like all of these amazing things which will impact individual lives. But you kind of have to start with that base.
What's so interesting about your story is that it's so unique because of your age and where you are now, and being still such a young person and being able to speak to people who are most likely going down the wrong path at the age that we're in now, with going to university and experiencing these new life moments, or even being in isolation and having to quarantine, like all these crazy times. Now everyone's experiencing something that they've never experienced before. So just kind of, how have you been coping with this? Because I'm sure it's also very hard on you, even though you're clearly such a strong person. I'm sure that the change has definitely maybe triggered some things or made you feel differently than you have.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to say, like, I'm so fortunate and so grateful to be in the position that I am today, to be able to have really like confronted the beast, like the really large, glaring beast so young, has been such a gift, right? Because I do have like that experience now, which really has taught me so many different like lessons and shown me so many different ways to think and just like interact with the world and be of service and all these different things, right? So yeah, I feel really grateful for that, and I'm just so thankful that I have the ability to give back in that way. But right now, I mean, yeah, it's really a crazy time. You know, it's really unique too, just because, as you said, a lot of people are facing kind of this heightened level of fear and anxiety, and maybe even depression, or those like depressive kind of symptoms, like not really wanting to get out of bed in the morning, or oversleeping or undersleeping, or, you know, under eating or overeating, lack of motivation, you know, like all these different things, which are really characteristic of depression. A lot of people are facing now in their day-to-day life, and that's very different for a lot of people, right? Not everybody has mental illness. A lot of people do, which is why we need to talk about it more, but a lot of people don't actually face that. And so it's been really interesting to watch this happen. It also has been a huge testimony actually to like the growth that I've had, because I don't feel very overwhelmed right now, and I don't feel anxious in my day-to-day life anymore, because of the work that I've done. And so, you know, for me, what kind of keeps me on track during these times, you know, like when I was starting to face those symptoms and was kind of starting to deal with them, the things that really were helpful to me was like primarily staying in contact with other people, really figuring out, you know, who were the people I could talk to, who I didn't feel like, no matter what I could say, you know, like they would never judge me.
Right.
And for me, that was like really big, you know, especially when you're dealing with anxiety and you're dealing with these fears, they can feel so like, you know, like you can feel really self-judgmental and just be really confused about why you're feeling so fearful and why you're feeling so anxious, and you don't really there's not always an explanation for that, right? Like sometimes, I mean, we're in a pandemic, so I mean, that's a pretty good explanation, but people still will, you know, invalidate that. So being sure to, you know, like really talk with people, like be selective about who I talk to about this with, about my anxieties or my depressive symptoms or anything like that, has been crucial. Making sure that I really minimize my media consumption has really also been crucial. Everybody around us having very heightened nervous systems right now, right? Like everybody's nervous systems are popping off. And the greatest thing that I can do is decrease my nervous system, because you know, people actually feed off of each other, right? Like
totally.
Yeah. And so
I'm guilty of it.
Yeah, of course we all are, right? And when I actually do minimize that media consumption, my nervous system activation goes down, and I'm able to like not only better live my life and like better deal with that anxiety if I'm still feeling it, or that like depressive like little voice in my head, or like anything like that. I'm also able to chat with my friends and be there for them in a better way.
Right.
Which for me is like crucial for my mental health recovery in general, actually, is really, you know, being there for other people. That can kind of seem counterintuitive, because it's like, oh my God, I'm freaking out so much. Like, what am I going to do? And it's a balance, right? You want to, of course, never, you know, never just put yourself aside to just only deal with somebody else's chaos. That is not dealing with anything that would be beneficial for me in my experience. What I have found is, you know, like actually being able to just listen to other people, whether it be in a time like this when everybody's freaking out, or not in a time like this and people are just dealing with stressful things, that can be really therapeutic actually for me, because once I turn the lens to someone else, that little anxiety voice and that little depressive voice doesn't get so loud, and realize that, you know, the reality that I'm living in is different than what the voices in my head are telling me, essentially, right? And that for me also just goes with distractions, you know, like being sure to, of course, like as I said, still talk about those feelings and things like that, but also being able to know what works to deal with those in a different way. So being sure to be active has still been really important for me. And actually meditation too. I meditate a lot. I love it. And I honestly am always trying to do more. As I said before, you know, that same tactic of really quieting those voices and essentially teaching yourself that, you know, those feelings are not facts, right? So that feeling that you will never overcome this and the world will never recover and will never be okay again and nothing will ever be normal and that's actually not a fact, right? It feels like a fact, but it's not. And so being able to, you know, meditate really actually helps me, again, just like kind of tune down those voices enough to be able to connect with the here and now, like the present moment. Yeah.
I really appreciate like the insight you've brought to this. And I think it's also really important, just like speaking back to your point a while ago, like we didn't at the time learn about these things and it wasn't talked about and we weren't educated. So like we'd see people or like I would see someone like you and I would judge and I would stigmatize it. And now I know that's wrong. And like, thank you so much for just shedding light to that point. It like real life examples are crucial.
Yeah. And yeah, your story is so unique and you are one of the most well-spoken and
seriously,
I want to be on here forever because you have really great advice. And I think during this time, it doesn't matter what you've gone through. We're all going through something huge right now. And I'm so grateful that we get to share everything you've said to everyone watching because I know it'll help every single person at this point. So thank you so much. It was so great.
Thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Chloe.
I'm really, like I said, I'm just like so grateful that I'm here today and like able to form a cohesive thought. Like, you know, like this is something I was not able to do when I was drinking and my life away. So yeah, this has been amazing. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
Well, stay safe and have a great weekend.
Thanks, you guys as well so much.
Bye.
Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Bye.